notes for a Russian podcast on werewolves.
Wow.
And it looks like there's some really unique stuff in there.
Oh, cool.
Not the things we usually see in English sources. I'm so ready to dig into this with you.
Me too.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so what I think is really interesting about this is that the werewolf myth, it's not just a scary story.
Right.
It's something way deeper. It's rooted in human history.
Yeah, this source material actually mentions that.
Yeah.
It talks about how it's connected to totemism, animism, shamanism. But to be honest, those terms, they always make me think of like a boring college lecture.
Right.
Could you maybe break those down for us a little?
Yeah, definitely. Think of it this way. Totemism is like the idea that humans, we have a special bond with certain animals.
Okay.
Almost like a protector or an ancestor. And then animism goes even further with that.
Oh, okay.
It suggests that everything in nature, plants, rocks, animals, they all have a spirit.
Okay.
And then you've got shamanism, which builds on that and focuses on people, shamans, who can actually talk with those spirits.
Right.
And sometimes even shapeshift into animals.
So are we saying that ancient people like really believed they could transform into animals?
It's possible. I mean, just imagine you're living in a world where nature's all around.
Right.
You depend on it for survival. So that line between human and animal, it might have been a lot blurrier.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
And these shamans with their rituals and trances, I mean, they might have seemed like they could actually cross that line.
Oh, that's so interesting. So maybe werewolves weren't just born out of fear.
Right.
Maybe it was this respect for nature, for the power of animals.
Yeah, and it's really cool how werewolves' beliefs are found all over the world.
Right.
Your source material actually points out some really amazing examples from all these different cultures.
I was so fascinated by that.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard of werewolves,
Yeah.
but this source talks about shape-shifting foxes in Japan were hyenas in Africa.
Yeah.
It's like this were-creature idea.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
Yeah, it's a universal thread.
It is.
Yeah.
What is it about this human-animal hybrid that's so captivating?
That is a question that has puzzled anthropologists and folklorists for ages.
Yeah.
I mean, part of it might be that fear of the unknown, right? The wildness that's out there.
Sure.
But I also think it speaks to that primal connection we have with animals.
Right.
Maybe something we long for in our modern lives.
Especially now when we're so disconnected from nature.
Absolutely.
Okay, so here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
I was so surprised to learn that werewolves weren't always seen as evil.
Oh, yeah.
I always just assumed they were monsters.
Right.
But the source is saying that's not always the case.
It really depends on the culture.
Okay.
In some cultures, shape-shifting was seen as a gift.
A gift.
Yeah, like a source of power.
Wow.
Remember those shamans we talked about? They were revered
Mm-hmm.
because they could talk to the animal world and harness their strength.
So some cultures saw it as a blessing. Others saw it as a curse.
Right.
I guess it all comes down to how they viewed the relationship between humans and nature.
Exactly. And that actually brings up a really interesting question.
Okay.
Why would some cultures embrace this ability
Right.
while others would fear it?
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell us about their worldview?
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, what does it tell us about how they understand the natural world?
I'm going to have to think about that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so the source also talks about the Middle Ages in Europe,
Oh, yeah.
and things get pretty dark there.
They do.
Yeah.
It was a dangerous time to be accused of being a werewolf.
I bet. We're talking witch hunts, trials, grim punishments.
Exactly.
What happened? What caused this shift to such a negative view of werewolves?
Well, there were a lot of things going on,
Right.
but a big one was the church.
Okay.
It was becoming more and more influential. And werewolves, they started to get associated with the devil with heresy,
I see.
along with witchcraft and anything else they considered pagan.
And then there was that Malleus Maleficarum,
Oh, yeah.
that witch hunting manual.
Right?
I remember reading about that. It said you could use the swimming test to identify witches and werewolves.
Oh, yeah. If you drowned, you were innocent.
Right?
But if you floated,
Guilty.
you were guilty.
Greasy.
Yeah, that book was published in the late 15th century.
Right.
And it basically became a guide for persecuting anyone suspected of witchcraft.
Or lycanthropy.
Right.
Wow.
They often relied on really flimsy evidence
Right.
or confessions they got through torture.
Oh, gosh.
And a lot of times, mental illness was mistaken for demonic possession or lycanthropy,
Well, that's awful.
leading to terrible injustice.
The source talks about Peter Stubb in 16th century Germany.
Yeah.
That seems like a really good example of this.
Peter Stubb was accused of a bunch of murders
Mm-hmm.
that he supposedly committed as a wolf. He was tortured and executed.
That's so sad.
It's a grim reminder of how brutal that era was.
Yeah.
Driven by fear, superstition.
And a lack of understanding.
Exactly.
So this medieval werewolf we've been talking about, it's totally different from the modern werewolf.
Right.
No silver bullets or full moon transformations back then.
Nope, those things came later.
Right.
Thanks to 20th century cinema.
Hollywood stepped in and gave the werewolf a makeover.
They sure did.
And I think a lot of those werewolf tropes we know today,
Yeah.
they come from a few key films.
Absolutely. London Werewolf from 1935 was an early one.
Right.
But The Wolf Man with Lon Chaney Jr. in 1941,
Yeah.
that's the one that really solidified those tropes.
The Wolf Man, such a classic.
Yeah.
The man battling the beast, the full moon transformation, the curse passing through a bite. It's like it set the stage for everything that came after.
It did. It really gave filmmakers something to work with.
Yeah, and they ran with it.
They created so many different versions of werewolves across so many genres.
Right.
Horror comedy, even romance.
It's true. And those tropes didn't just stay in film either.
No, they didn't.
They went into books, video games, pop culture.
Everywhere.
It makes you wonder, though,
What's that?
why did those specific elements resonate so much with audiences? Was it just good storytelling?
It could be.
Or was there something more?
You know, we talked about how werewolves often represent our anxieties, right? Well, the 1940s, when The Wolfman came out,
Yeah.
that was a time of a lot of change.
Right, World War II.
Yeah, psychoanalysis was on the rise.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe people were anxious about losing control,
Right.
about that darkness underneath the surface.
Yeah.
And they found a way to express that through the werewolf.
That's a good point. Okay, so we talked about influential films.
Yeah.
What are some other examples of werewolves in movies, books, or games that you think really stand out?
Ooh. Okay, well, in film, you've got An American Werewolf in London.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that one's so good.
Still terrifying, still hilarious.
And those transformation effects?
Oh, they were groundbreaking.
I know. And then there's The Howling,
Yeah.
which really focuses on werewolves as a pack.
Right, as a community,
Yeah.
not just lone creatures.
And we can't forget about Silver Bullet,
Oh, it's
based on the Stephen King story.
Mm-hmm.
That one introduced the werewolf hunter.
It did?
Man, that transformation scene in An American Werewolf in London,
Oh, yeah.
the first time I saw it,
Yeah.
it blew me away.
Those practical effects still hold up today.
They do. You know, I have to admit, I love a good werewolf story with a strong female lead,
Oh, yeah.
like Ginger Snaps.
Ginger Snaps, oh, that's a classic,
For a reason.
for sure.
Yeah.
And in literature, werewolves have been around forever.
Right.
You can find elements of lycanthropy in those classic Gothic novels.
Oh, right, like Dracula
Yeah, Dracula by Bram Stoker.
and The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Exactly, by Oscar Wilde.
So cool. And more recently, we've got werewolves in young adult fiction, like Twilight,
Yeah,
where they're the romantic heroes.
that's right.
And in fantasy series like Harry Potter,
Mm-hmm.
where Remus Lupin's werewolf side adds this whole other layer to the story.
It does. It adds complexity and tragedy.
And we can't forget about video games.
Oh, no, they love werewolves, too.
Oh.
Like in the Elder Scrolls games,
Ah,
you can actually become a werewolf
that's right.
with all these special abilities and challenges.
So cool. Then there's Bloodborne,
Ooh, Bloodborne.
where the werewolves are like these terrifying, shadowy creatures.
Yeah, almost Lovecraftian.
Right. And in The Witcher 3,
Yes.
Geralt fights this really memorable werewolf.
Yeah.
And it's not just a simple monster.
No, there's a lot more to his story.
It's clear that the werewolf has come a long way,
It really has.
from those ancient roots to its modern version.
Mhm.
But it makes you think,
About what?
why are we still so fascinated by these stories?
Yeah,
In a world that's so scientific and advanced?
that's a great question.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because on a deeper level, werewolves represent something primal within us.
Yeah.
That duality of human nature.
Right. The struggle between our civilized selves and our instincts.
Exactly.
Like that battle between reason and emotion control and letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe werewolves tap into
I
that.
think so.
That fear of losing control.
Right, of letting the beast take over.
I know. I've had moments where I just wanted to howl at the moon.
Oh, yeah, me too.
Maybe a little road rage or like a really intense karaoke session.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, you know, in our modern world,
Yeah.
we're so urbanized, so disconnected from nature.
Mm-hmm.
So Maybe the werewolf,
Yeah.
with all its power and its connection to animals,
Yeah.
represents something we've lost touch with.
That makes sense. There's definitely something appealing about shedding all those rules and expectations
For sure.
and just embracing that primal way of being.
Even if it's just for a little while.
Exactly. And you know what's interesting?
What's that?
Some modern stories are exploring the idea of good werewolves.
Oh, yeah.
Characters who can control their transformations
Yeah.
and use their abilities to help people.
To protect instead of prey on.
Yeah. It's like we're moving past that simple monster idea and finding new ways to look at this myth.
I love that. It's like the werewolf is becoming a symbol of accepting all of ourselves.
Yeah, the good and the bad.
Exactly. Instead of fearing those darker impulses,
Right.
it's a reminder that we all have the potential for both.
Wow, that's deep. I never thought I'd have an existential crisis from talking about werewolves.
I never knew.
You've definitely given me a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So to bring it back to our listener,
Yes.
what are some of the key takeaways from this deep dive?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that werewolves, they're so much more than just monsters and horror stories.
Yeah.
They're these complex figures, and they've been with us for centuries.
Mhm.
And they show how our relationship with nature has changed,
Right.
how we understand ourselves, the human mind,
Yeah.
and that fascination we have with the unknown.
That wildness.
Exactly. The wildness out there and inside us.
I think it's so interesting how the werewolf has changed over time.
Yeah.
It went from being this creature of terror
Mhm.
to a symbol of our struggles, our desires,
Right.
even our potential for good and bad.
Exactly. And as we keep exploring werewolves in movies and books and everything else,
Yeah.
I can't wait to see how they'll reflect our anxieties and our hopes.
Me too.
Like, what new things will we discover about them?
Right.
What new stories will we tell?
I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah.
It's like the werewolf is a mirror,
Yeah.
showing us how we're changing as humans
Reflecting our own evolution.
and reminding us that there's always more to learn
Absolutely.
about ourselves and the world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, you've given our listener a lot to think about today.
I hope so.
So to wrap things up,
Okay.
I want to leave you with one last question,
Right.
something to really ponder.
Okay.
We talked a lot about how werewolves represent that duality in us.
The beast within.
Right. But what if we look at it differently?
How so?
What if the real monster isn't the werewolf itself,
Okay.
but the fear and prejudice we have
Oh.
that makes us label anything different as dangerous or evil?
Whoa. You're saying the real beast might not be in us, but
Yeah.
something we put on others.
Exactly. What do you think?
That's something to think about for sure.
Right.
It reminds me that sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones with fangs and claws,
Mm-hmm.
but the ones in our own hearts.
Yeah.
Our fear, our prejudice, the fact that we don't want to understand things that are different.
So well said. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And a huge thanks to you, our listener, for sending in that fascinating source material.
Yes, thank you.
This was a really thought-provoking look at werewolves,
It was.
their history and their power. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep embracing that wildness inside you.
That's right.
You never know. You might just find a little bit of the werewolf in yourself.